We ready? I said, are you ready? All right, doors getting closed. Getting close, time to class. Yep. There's one more B in there, though, for the group. All right. Good morning, everybody. If I seem like I'm shaking a little bit, those are just the essential tremors that I have. It's not that I'm nervous or anything else. And then if I also have a wincing look or just kind of it's not because of whatever you're saying. It's because the sciatica has been kicking my tail here for 2 months now. And so standing, sitting, it doesn't matter. So if I do give you that look, it's not because of anything that you had to say. I haven't taught in 7, 8 years now, as far as the adult class goes. And so bear with me on a lot of this stuff. For those of you who were with me on the search committee, you know that I will bounce from one thing to another and not put the clutch in. It'll just go from first to fifth and then back to third. And so if I'm ever going too fast or I lose you, just ask the question. Just say, well, Jay, that makes no sense where you're going with this one. And so I bring that up to let you know how I came about this class. 5 years ago, when we had David Fleer, who was here teaching with us, started in Mark, and he showed us a way of looking at the text as literature and not just as the straight words going through something. And again here, it took me 3 semesters to get through 2 semesters of English in college. So I'm definitely out of my comfort zone when I start talking about literature and some of the things that we're going to go over and through this one. And the first one he did, if you have your Bibles and if you're familiar with these stories, open up to Mark chapter 2. And you may have subtitles or titles in front of these paragraphs as you go through them. This reminded me that just because it says a verse or a chapter, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where the author intended for the story to stop along the way. And this was the first one where he really pointed it out to us of how the Gospel of Mark was written and what style it was written in order to achieve the end purpose of getting everybody to remember the story and be able to tell it again. And what's the main point of what's being said here. And so start with just Mark chapter 2 and advance this down. Maybe it helps if I turn it on. All right. So there's 5 stories in here. So first one, 1 through 12. the paralytic is healed, all right? And so I'm not going to read through this one, but this starts to explain a lot of the why, and it discusses how Jesus had the physical and spiritual healing power. He had both of those, and he was able to cure a paralytic. The next story is about the Pharisees, and he's going into what is he being told to do or not to do, and why people are eating certain things or not eating certain things. And his message here in the second one is in 17, where he's talking about it's not the righteous man, but it's the sinners. And that is why Jesus was called, or correction, no, not called, but that's the message that Jesus is putting out, is why is he eating with the sinners? Why is he drinking with the sinners and the tax collectors? It's because it's not important that he is going to hang out with the Pharisees. He's not going to be there to be the, just hang out with the righteous. It's to save the sinners. And then the middle story is the parable of the cloth and the wineskins. And in that one, we're looking at Jesus telling everybody here that it's not the old covenant that we're trying to recreate going forward. It's a new covenant. And the parable talks about how if you have a dried up wineskin and you put the wine in, it's not going to work. That it's going to, it's just going to burst. That's the basic line on that parable. Next one comes back to the Pharisees again and working on the Sabbath. And then the last one was healing on the Sabbath. And you start to see this pattern of, and this is a chiasm, A, B, C, B, A. And so if you look at it in terms of how this is structured, it's the second chapter going into the third chapter, but there are 5 stories, the middle one being the most important and the one that he wants to emphasize. And the last one, the next 2 then go back to the first 2 points. And so what he's trying to do in here is say, all right, this is true, here's my main message, and then reinforce it with the last 2. And it was a way of letting somebody know that that was also the end of the story. It's kind of like the old Paul Harvey, and now you know the rest of the story. Well, that's this style, where it's telling you, here's what's true, here's the most important part, and then going back and reinforcing it along the way. And so that's what started my brain going in different directions. But what it really hit me is when Teresa and George were reading from Mark chapter 5, and that's a case where we had a parable within a parable. Not just 5 different stories, but a story that was broken up into 2 parts with a parable in the middle. And so if you turn over to Mark 5, and you go to 21 through 24, we have the story of Jairus, whose daughter is ill, and he's coming forward to try to get his daughter healed. Let me go forward to this one. And then in the middle of that story, there's a woman who is trying, that was hemorrhaging, that was trying to be healed, and her line in there, that's the famous one, is, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I know I'll be healed. One of the great Sam Cooke songs, too, in there. All right. And then it closes with coming back and Jesus saying, your daughter's healed. She's fine. There's nothing wrong with her anymore. And so this is Jesus' power that he has to heal somebody, but the emphasis is the story starts, it has the part in the middle, which is just that faith, that all they have to do is believe in Jesus and that they would be healed. And so as I was listening to this, I then went back in time in my head and said, I've seen this pattern before. I've seen this in the Bible before. And I went back and one of my other lessons not lesson, but at a funeral, I was using Isaiah 51 rather than 53. And then I said, wait a second, 53, that sounds like 55. And I started putting the pattern together there in the back half of Isaiah and realizing, wait, this 49 goes with this 55, and started mixing and matching and said, wait a second, I got the same thing here. And I had no idea what it was called until David went and showed us in class. And so I looked at this and said, well, I want to teach this class a little bit differently. I want to make sure that we get people involved in this. This will be the most that I talk, is getting this introduction through. And this will be a discussion. I wanted to pick something easy because I haven't taught in so long. So I wanted to take something that wasn't going to, show how much I don't know along the way. We usually look at these books when we study up here, and it's one chapter every week. And we start slugging through it. And we go through from chapter 1 to chapter 17 or whatever it is. And we do one chapter a week. 30 minutes or so on a class, that's about what we spend. So I'm thinking, all right, that's all the time I got. I'm going to stand up here, and unlike some other teachers that we have that may talk with a big A authority, I'm only the little a. All right, I'm not the authority on anything. The Bible's the authority, and where I will go to on this one. So don't think that I'm standing up here and that I know everything about everything in the book, or I know where every city's at. I got a good idea, but I want to just be open and say, look, this is about us discussing and us learning all together, and not me standing up here just telling you things. That's not what this is going to be about. All right, and I already hit that one. So we had Clark took us through a great study on prophecies and the prophets and the different types of prophecies that were out there and how that they were fulfilled, and whether they were messianic or however, looking at what was going to happen to Israel, say, in the future. And so I'm not going to go through any of that stuff, but I wanted to just remind everybody there were multiple ways that a prophecy could be announced to the people that it was intended for. There are different mediums. There were different ways of doing it. And so when we look at the prophets, know that their message can be put out not just in the words. All right? And it can be about the event. It can be about a person. They're not all, bless you, it's not all going to be about foretelling the coming of Jesus as the Messiah. All right. A little bit over a decade ago, Rod Grimes, if you remember Rod and Patrice, Rod had the advanced Bible study going for a little while in there, and he took us through Isaiah. And it was so in-depth, there's no way in the world I would ever even try to recreate what Rod took us through. And given that, we usually spend 1 week on each chapter. If I do Isaiah, then that's the next 66 weeks that you'd have to listen to me stumbling through and trying to complete a class. So I'm not going to go that way. But what I'm going to ask everybody is, as we're studying, we're going to just take our time. It's not a race to get through. I'm not going to feel pressured to get to that next slide or the next bullet point. If there's something to discuss, we're going to discuss it. And if I finish, I finish. All right. I have enough material in here where I'm confident for the next 6 weeks that I won't finish, but we're going to do the best we can to get through it all. I also, thinking back to George and Teresa, when we read the word aloud and hear it, you get a different feeling for it. And it depends on also the version that you have. I use the New American Standard. NIV's in the pews. Tim, what's the name on Tim's that he used? NET. And then King James, whenever we used to read Scripture, that was always the pull-out one. You pulled out the King James version because you sounded cool when you got to read from that one. But you get a different feel for the way that it is. I spent a lot of time, looking things up. Because usually if I didn't know how to pronounce something, like, say, Mephibosheth, and I'll just go M and just keep going and keep reading. I won't stop. I will just breeze through it. If I don't know how to pronounce it, I say I got it. That's M, and I just go forward. But I want to take some time for those things that we don't know. Pronunciations on cities. We'll work on that, and we'll take some time to understand it. One of the things that I never did, probably the first 10 years of having my current Bible that I had, I never wrote in it. I was just like, I don't want to write in it. And I was like, well, this is silly, because then I can't remember everything that all those lessons were on. So then I started scribbling in it and taking notes and putting quotes and other things in there so that I could see where a lesson either had gone before or where I wanted to take something new. Most of the time it was just learning in a class. And so don't be afraid if you've got your own Bible to take notes in it along the way. The big thing here is look for repetition. Because you have repetition doesn't mean that you are boring or you're just saying the same thing over and over again. The point is that these stories were meant to be memorized. And they were memorized through song, through retelling of the story over and over again, because they didn't have a printed copy. This is going back 1,000, 2,000 years, 3,000 years now. And so this was the way that they taught, by memorizing and saying it over and over and over again. The other piece of it is, when you hear something once, it just kind of goes through you. What's the saying? You got to hear it 7 times or whatever to remember it. Well, that's the same thing here. Is if you start to see things that are mentioned again and again and again, it may be important. So look for those things that are being repeated in here. It's because they want that message to get across. It's not just that they like hearing themselves talk and want to keep going on that. Clark.
Not only repetition, but the structure you're talking about, ABA or ABBA, that helped people in an oral culture. Having some structure helps them remember. Because they didn't all have a written copy of Isaiah to read and go back home and consult. But if it were read aloud and there was some structure and some repetition, then maybe they could remember.
And the last two, one is just going through it. We're going to study it in groups of chapters, not just going 1, 2, 3. It'll be in different sections. And the last one is let's figure out how what Isaiah is saying relates to the rest of the Bible and how it's being said. One of the things that I know when you write a paper or you're trying to express something, you tell them up front, here's all those things that I'm not going to talk about, okay? There are people that argue that Isaiah was written by more than just one person, that the first 39 books or chapters were written by Isaiah, and then the next 27 books were written by somebody else or his followers. I'm not going to worry about doing that. most recent studies that I found, although they started to try to refute the multiple author, prove the multiple author theory through computer analysis of the chapters and the words and the text and how it was used, they ended up finding more similarities between all 66 chapters than they did differences. And so we're not going to worry about that. Like I said, there are some people who divide it up into multiple authors. The first 39 chapters are Proto-Isaiah. The next either 27 or taking it 16 chapters, that's Deutero-Isaiah, that's the second half, and the third part, the 56 through 66, the last 11 chapters. Like I said, we're not going to worry about that. We're not going to argue over who wrote it, how many people were involved in the editing process here. The idea is the single copy of Isaiah was found with the Dead Sea Scrolls. One complete version, 400 BC. Everything was in there. It was all done long before Jesus was born. Yes, it was after the two captivities in Assyria and Babylonia, but for the purposes of what we're going to talk about in here, we're just going to say one singular form, one author, and just go with that. All right. Yes, there are 66 books in the Bible, and there are 66 chapters in Isaiah. Yes, the first 39 chapters are generally thought of in one group, and the last 27 are in another, just like the Bible. But we're not going to focus on that part of it. There's the cycle of sin, judgment, punishment, redemption that goes on and on and on and on throughout the book of Isaiah, as well as the Old Testament. We're going to have the 27 books of the New Testament talk about the new covenant, and there's all the hope and redemption, and we can draw that parallel, but we're not. Nobody saw it written. Nobody was there back to, that's around now, 3,000 years later. The interesting thing that I found is the recorded history on the secular side, specifically in Assyria and Babylon, do track with the events with Isaiah and the times and the kings and everything, pretty much lines up within 2 to 5 years of when they say something happened. So I'm pretty confident that it was written around that time. And then last, we all have different versions of the Bible. And so as we go through it, if somebody's got a different word or a different phrase in there, I would appreciate you bringing it up, because it's one, I don't know Hebrew or Greek or anything, so I can't go back to the original text, and I just have to trust that whoever interpreted and translated the text that we have in front of us is as accurate as it can be. But that being said, I'd really, if something's different and you have, just bring it up. Another interesting one I found was somebody tried to teach the entire Bible out of Isaiah. And you could probably do that, because you can talk about creation, can talk about Satan, talk about Jesus being born of a virgin, crucifixion of Jesus, obviously in 53, the fact that there was grace, mercy, salvation, all promised in there. Got the kingdom of Jesus, and then the new heavens and earth revelations. And so you can use it, but we're not going to go that way. And so what I wanted to do was kind of level set everybody on Isaiah and the book and what's being said. And so I found this, 8 minutes. So that's all you got to put up with the story here, is for 8 minutes, and we pretty much cover the book. We'll advance. Sound will help. Mhm.
When I was in grad school, I was taught to write one way. When I got a job, they taught me to write a different way, very different structure and very different form. And when I go to read those things, or customers go to read them, they know where everything's at, right? They understand it, how it's written. Just makes me think of how important it is to understand how these authors wrote these things. Because a lot of times I'll go to them and not get that. Like when you showed Mark in that form, I wouldn't have, I would have said those are 5 different stories that are just kind of strung together, for some reason, but wouldn't necessarily pick up on kind of in the middle you're getting to this point. I might not have said that was the story that was the point of that chapter, but understanding that gives me a very different view of what's trying to be communicated.
And for those of you that are reading along, today is the first day that we're into Isaiah in our daily read. The challenge is going to be, I thought I could line everything up because it would have worked perfectly until I started reading everything that we're reading in there. And because it's chronological, it's chopped up. And so you don't necessarily get to read the entire book of Isaiah straight through. So you're bouncing from one story to another along the way. But, yep. Still quiet. No sound. All right, so you're going to have to listen to me then. I know, Mike. It's going to be tough. All right. All right. So, who was Isaiah? Do we know? What's the Bible tell us about Isaiah? What do we know? Well, he's a prophet, okay. Where did he prophesy? And all right. And about when? 8th century. All right. No. Went through 4 kings down in Judah. Depending on which math you use, new math or old math, he either prophesied for 40 years or 60 years, somewhere in that range. So let's just call it, 50, 60. It doesn't matter. What matters is he was there trying to tell the leaders of Judah for years, here's what's coming. Here's what you got to do to change. He made it down. He outlived Hezekiah, that's clear, and was, I don't want to say ministering, but he was there with Manasseh as well. The key thing here is to know, how did he get there? How was he connected to these kings? Anybody know how Isaiah, can you imagine, being senior advisor to 4 different presidents and just being in that circle? How did Isaiah get in that circle? Well, God put him there. The first one, son of Amos. Who was he? Brother of the king. So he was already into that royal family, if you will. So he was well educated. He was well received. You had Micah and Hosea, also contemporaries. That's why you will see them intertwined in our daily readings as far as what they're writing about and who they're writing to. Just for context, about that same time in that 8th century, you've got Rome being founded. You have the Assyrian captivity and then the Babylonian captivity. I always found it interesting. Most of the time when we have these books in the Bible, that first chapter, those first sentences are your justification, who you are, why are you writing, your calling if you're a prophet. But we don't see it until the 6th chapter of Isaiah, that he's called to service in the Lord. And that was another one that I said, why do we have to wait 6 chapters? And so it's also the motto of Liberty's ROTC unit down there. Here am I, send me. All right, so last ones. You have a combination of poetry and prose. Most of what Isaiah is written in is pure poetry. And when you can read it that way, you have a different appreciation for the words. Next week, like I said, this is the one that I'm going to be talking the most on, just getting the background stuff. I'll see if I can get my video working for next week on it. When you look at Paul's writings and how he uses that structure in specifically Romans, where it's that same idea of, I'm going to tell you something, give you a second point, here's the most important lesson, and then going down and then backing it up again. You'll see groups of 5, groups of 7, groups of 4, but the idea is Paul's writing, and the credit that Paul gets for what he does, Isaiah did that in the Old Testament and did it 800 years before Paul. All right, so I appreciate everybody's attention for this morning and look forward to next week when everybody will be talking more.